Today I'm going to start my preparations for actually getting the thing to fire up. There's a lot of inspection stuff to do first, because as I might have said in my previous videos, this car has come as a complete unknown to me, and there are signs that this engine has never actually been run when it's been in this car. Basically, when I got it, I had a peer through the oil filler cap, and it looked quite shiny and clean inside. When I took the covers off, it basically looked like the rocker gear hadn't got any furring up on it, or oil, dust and crap and sludge like you usually get with SD1 V8s. So it looked like it was really clean inside, which was strange. And then when I actually started looking at the spark plugs, they were finger tight and the compression rings had never been crushed, so it looked like they'd never been torqued up. So it's very possible that this engine has never actually run in this car, which is good in one way, but an annoyance in another, because it means I basically have to go through absolutely everything from the start. I mean, it could be those carbs, even if it fires, aren't set up right. So first thing for me to do is look at the electrical systems, get a good battery, follow that through, see if the starter does anything. I'm not going to try and turn it. I know it turns with a bar on the crank pulley, so it's not seized. I'm going to pull all the airbox and everything out of the way. I want to check what coolant's in there, what sort of condition that is in. Then I'm going to set about getting oil pressure, making sure there's oil circulating nicely. And then the last thing will be to add some fuel, check the spark, and then crank it. But we will see how far through we get on those checks today. The first thing I need to do is go and get something to hold the bonnet up, because those rams don't seem to be doing their job. Bonnet stay achieved. I've removed the inlet parts just because they were loose from last time I was playing with this. I have actually spotted now that there is no fuel filter. Somebody's removed it. So whether there was ever fuel in there, I don't know. I'm actually starting with the cooling system purely because it was right in front of me. You can see some coolant in that bottle, which looks very blue, which is encouraging. It hasn't either evaporated or turned to crystal. However, when I squeeze the main hoses, you can't really hear a great deal. There's a lot going on. You can hear a bit of air coming through. And what can happen if you leave a car standing for ages is the coolant goes a bit funny, like jelly, and crystallizes up, and you can see a bit of it here. So I'm going to whip the top rad hose off and just check the thermostat and the thermostat housing area and make sure that's not crudded up, because it'll probably be that bit that it starts forming at, because it's just above the water pump, got all that alloy of the inlet, and it's also the highest point of the engine apart from the header tank. So as the fluid level drops, that's where it's going to evaporate off. So I'm just going to undo this one and then have a look inside. The comedically large and long clip on there as well. I have to say, the whole engine bay is actually really neat in terms of not only rust, but actually the way things have been routed. Like, somebody did this with some care. It wasn't a bodger, it was somebody who knew what they were doing. I say that, I mean, I might turn out all the timings off or something, but what have we got? Right, yes, that is absolutely dry. You can see the jelly stuff I was on about. We have liquid coolant, and I can see the thermostat, and that's clear. There is some debris in the bottom there. That's the sort of shit you got to be watch out for, because it goes hard and grainy, and that can damage things, I guess, if it's getting pumped around. So I might do a coolant flush on it, but at least there is coolant in there, which is very good news, because hopefully the rest of the coolant system, with a bit of a flush once it's up to temperature, will come good. So that's good. For the moment, and for my initial cranking, I will just put that back on, because I want this to warm up and circulate. I'll top it up, but other than that, I'll leave the coolant system well alone once I've got all the air out. Happy days. Right, the coolant system is topped up. It took a hell of a lot of fresh water, so it's getting cold as well, so that is a very temporary thing. So when I say it's getting cold, basically it could freeze, so I need to replace that with antifreeze pretty damn quick. But for the moment, it's full of water, so if it does start, it's not going to cook itself. and at least I can get it circulating and then drain it and then fill it with fresh antifreeze afterwards. But yeah, it's full of water and it's holding. I am going to do what I said I wasn't going to do and just shove a battery on it just to crack it with a key, just to make sure that circuit's working. I won't do any serious cranking because obviously I want it primed with oil first. Just been poking around in here with the battery. We got some quite interesting wiring. The earth stuff is just dead simple. It's a bit different to standard, but it looks good. So that's the well, it's actually got 2 earth points from the engine to the chassis, one down there which is original, and then this second lead which actually goes to the battery terminal itself, and then another one to the body down there. What's slightly different is that we've got one of those anti-theft devices here which tees off. Then one of them comes up to the actual cut-off switch which goes to the starter, and then the loom is actually powered through that one, which goes into this horrible taped together lump, which then goes into the car's main loom. Oh, originally that would have been on there, and then it would have teed off to the starter and the alternator. So it all looks like it will work. It's just a bit of a strange arrangement. So that's a battery that came with the car. I think it is. It might be one of mine, I can't remember now. I might have been playing with it before. But anyway, I've got a jump pack, so I'm just going to slap that on there, turn the key and see if the start circuit works. If not, I'll have to go digging for the start relay, which I think is one of those 2 in there. So I'll get set up and then turn the key and hopefully it doesn't catch fire. But I've got the hose pipe on standby just in case. Okay, the jump pack is on and I've turned it on. That is on, that is screwed in. Can't hear any clicking or relays or anything. Let's look at the dash. Right, so dash lights come on, so we're getting power. Tail lights. Hey, side lights at least, because the ignition isn't on. This is just as you would expect. We have got back a look at that. Right, okay, so horn, no horn. Right, so this is ignition, or not ignition, this is first stage. That I think is ignition. Oh, right, well I went to bollocks. Oh, it's a good job this windscreen's scrap, isn't it? That sounded beautiful. That's quite good, because they're notoriously crap, the wipers on the SD1s. Look at that, beautiful. Let's switch those bad boys off. Right, so I don't know whether you could hear that, but when I actually turned the key a bit too far, it did try and start. So, well, it didn't try and start, but it at least turned the starter motor. I think that's just an indication of how little battery power there is in that jump pack. But I know that at least the starter solenoid is being thrown. The starter isn't turning, but that could be low battery rather than because it's seized or because the solenoid's stuck. So I'm going to go put that thing on charge, call that a mini success actually, and then I'll turn my attentions back to oil pressure related matters. I thought just to confirm that it was that was causing the problem, I brought a multimeter out and just put it across the battery when that is connected and turned on. It says it's got 12.8 volts. I'm out here by myself, so I can't really see what that drops to when it's cranking. But I don't actually think it's the battery that's the problem. I think it's the car drawing power or not being able to draw power. So I am going to clean off all the earths and things, or without the camera in my hand, try and crank it again, or get the voltage down there at the starter, like between the chassis and the starter, to see if I'm actually getting 12 volts down there, because I suspect I'm not. So I'm going to continue playing before I give up on the jump pack. Well, I've been playing with the electrics again, taken that cut-off switch out from underneath its housing and then put a meter between that and there, and you're getting a voltage drop already, and that's quite a direct path. So I think what's happening is there's so much corrosion on the various terminals and connectors that by the time it gets to the starter, even though the starter is engaging, or at least it's trying to do something, it's not got enough meat to turn the engine over. So I'm going to disconnect everything, all the earths, all the positives that I can get to easily, clean them up, and hopefully that'll help. I don't know, we'll try it. You might have noticed I've invested in an LED work light, which is making being out here a lot more pleasant. Got my big high-vis padded coat and a hat. Got the battery out as well, and look at that. That is one of the most solid battery trays I have seen on an unrestored SD1 for a very long time. Again, turrets, perfect. That's usually the bit that goes there and there. Both sides absolutely perfect. That battery tray is fine. Do you remember all the welding I had to do on the blue car all across the scuttle and where the clutch went and the servo? That is all fine. It's basically perfect, and I've checked from both sides of the bulkhead. So this is definitely a candidate for restoration. I certainly won't be scrapping it. It's too good for that. It might not look it on the outside with all of that surface rust, but is actually inherently a really good car. So I'm much relieved. That really is surprising. I didn't expect that. That's good. Right, so I'm now doing the boring job of just cleaning up all of these earths and positives and terminals. Particularly going to focus on that connection there and what goes up to here, because I know that's wrong. And then it's a case of the lead down to the starter and making sure that the actual starter to the block is good too, because of course it earths out through the block and then back through to the battery or the body shell. So I'm going to have to basically systematically go through absolutely everything, clean it all up, maybe put a bit of Vaseline or WD-40 on the bits that I think look particularly suspect. So boring but necessary. Right, well, we have now had a bit of a result. I found quite a lot of problems with that switch, so I took it all apart, put it back together again, jump pack on, and I have just tried this off camera, not because I was trying to fool anyone, but just because it's late. Yeah, so now when you turn the key, it cranks and turns. It doesn't turn very quickly, but we're getting somewhere. So I'm going to call it a night for tonight, but next stage really is to put that back mounted nicely, get under the car and do all of the starter cables actually at the starter motor. It's another day. It happens to be an absolutely stunning day. It's my lunch break, so I've just popped out here to have a very quick think about the next stage. Last night I got it cranking, battery's on charge, so that's good. I need oil pressure. What I need to do is prime the oil system. On these cars, what can happen if you leave them for standing for ages, or you build the engine up and you've never primed the oil pump, you can crank and crank and crank and it just won't draw any oil and you'll just fuck your engine basically. So what you should ordinarily do is take the oil pump apart, which is down there, fill it with Vaseline, put it back together, and then when you first crank it, there's enough draw through the Vaseline being pumped out of the pump that it sucks up through the pickup tube and off you go. There's two reasons why I'm not going to do that. One is I can't be bothered to take the oil pump apart, and the other is that I don't know if there was ever oil circulating in this engine, so even if I was cranking it for the first few turns, there's going to be no oil in there to go through all the bearing clearances, because it could have been like oiled on assembly and filled with assembly lube when it was built, and then nothing else happened. So instead what I'm going to do is take the distributor out, and then at home, I don't have it with me today, but I've got a little tool that I put on a drill, and then I can I can connect it straight to the end of the oil pump, spin it up, and then that will give me oil pressure. So that's what I'm going to do. So first step, get the distributor out. So I've just rotated the engine, so the timing mark now lines up on top dead center there, and I know we are on the compression stroke because both rockers can be moved, so those valves are both closed. So I'm going to mark that distributor now and just double check that when the cap is closed at that position, it's on spark lead number 1. So I'm going to put that cap back on and just make sure first. So just put the cap back on its locating peg. I haven't clipped it up, but basically you can't rotate the cap independently of the body. There's a little tang, which means that it can only go one way. I've reconnected these just in the order they were, and you can see number 1 is this one, comes up all the way around and goes to that one. So when I pull this off, the rotor arm should be pointing at that one. So let's have a look, and it basically is. So we know that it's timed up broadly correctly. So we're going to mark the distributor now, so that when I pull it out, I can put it back in. Because it's on a helical gear, every time you pull this up and down, the rotor arm actually moves slightly. I'll try and explain. I'll try and actually film it as I pull it off, but you'll see that distributor is actually driven by the camshaft on the helical gear, and then on the bottom of the distributor it engages with the oil pump. So basically I'm trying to replicate that drive mechanism, but instead of the cam driving the distributor to drive the oil pump, I'm going to be driving the oil pump directly with a drill. But yeah, it's just the fact that obviously there's a little bit of play there anyway, because you've got the vacuum advance over there. That's its natural rest position, so I'll mark that here. Then I'll, oh, that shouldn't be doing that. Right, it looks like the little shield has come out, so I'll have to fix that too. Just clip it back into place. Yeah, I'll get that out. What I've done is I've put a little mark on the centre of the rotor arm and down here. And then, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to show you this, but I've removed the clamp that holds the distributor to the timing cover, which would have gone in that bolt hole there. And then I've marked the body of the distributor. I don't think I'm going to be able to get a view of this. There's, no, I can't get it. Oh, maybe I can. Can you see that scrape mark? That's basically a lining between the body of the dizzy. Sorry, managed to turn my phone off part video. But yeah, I've got a scrape mark to associate the dizzy body to the timing cover. Got my mark here for the rotor arm, and then basically gonna unplug it and lift it out. But as I pull it up, watch that. Watch how much the rotor arm moves. See, it jumps. That's it rolling on and off the helical gear because of that bad boy. Then in there you can see the tip of the pump that I'm going to get a tool on. While this is out, I'm going to have a quick look and see how much play there is in it. Yeah. You have bearings and then you have a pinion as well. It actually feels pretty good. There's a little up and down play, but you always have that. So yeah, that feels good. This is an early type, so it has the ignition amplifier thing on here and just runs 2 lines up to the coil. There's the vacuum advance there, and then inside, do we have mechanical points? I don't know. We'll have to take the rotor arm off and have a closer look, which will be a 2-handed job. So that's inside our distributor. I've just pulled the rotor arm off and that shield. That's the little pickup, looks like a Hall effect one. So as that rotates, it just triggers the signal. And then attached to that we have the vacuum advance with this little rod, and that goes off to the inlet through that pipe there. So I have to make sure to fit all those back together again when I put it back in. Actually, on the surface of things, it actually looks quite nice in there. So yeah, that's off. I'm going to get some rag just to protect all of these bits while I'm cranking. I'll also take that other cover off because I want to make sure I'm getting oil coming up through both sets of rocker gear. I thought while I was out here, might as well pull the spark plugs and then I can take them in to clean them up because they are a bit old looking. A lot of them have got this green goo. Try and find an example. It's, you know, sometimes I pull plugs out and find them covered with copper slip. these have a kind of green tinted glue, almost like thread lock, but I don't know why, because all the threads look fine in the block, so it's not like a thread repair type of thing. It's just strange. They're all finger tight Bosch Platinums. What else have I done? Yeah, I think I might take the suction chambers off the carbs and have a look at the needles and make sure they're not covered in evaporated fuel. You can see inside where somebody's linished the internal profile, probably to make it flow a little better. I'm also curious to see what the needles are, because if they've been altered, it might be that there's some other sort of camshaft in there. So I'll just undo the 3 screws, lift that carefully off, try not to damage the needle. Right, so there's suction chamber or dash pot and the needle. You wouldn't say there's a lot wrong with that. Looking inside, oh, it's still got the you see, I don't know whether you can, basically a poppet valve on the back of the butterfly. So there's a bit of like old fuel in there, but not sort of varnished like I've seen before. So basically I'll shoot a bit of brake cleaner in there just to get rid of some of the crap, but it looks okay. The jet's quite low in there. I was expecting like standard setting to be about 1 mil. That's not an indication of a fault. It might mean that it's been tuned to be a bit rich. Right, now at the other side, I'm trying to not drop dust in there, but I recognise I'll just have to clean it out again if I do. That looks pretty good. Again, we've got some sort of sedimenty stuff, a bit gooey but not too bad. Hopefully the floats and the actual fuel ports in the bottom will be okay. That one's a bit more crappy. And again, there you can see the poppet valve on the butterfly. Usually if it's been race tuned or someone's done something really clever with the carbs, that will have been deleted. That's what I did with the police car. It just means that you get a bit of airflow through there, because when the throttle's wide open, that poppet valve doesn't stick out into the air inlet and slow the air through. The other thing people do is, you see those little screws that hold the brass butterfly, which is the big disc, to the spindle. They'll take them and they'll grind them down, sand them down, so that they don't disturb the airflow either. Try and get that in there. Right, so this car's definitely been run. You can tell by the oil in there and the fuel that's in those. So that's good, because it basically does a lot of the checking for me. I'll just make sure and do it nicely by getting good oil pressure, making sure that's circulating, fresh fuel, and then try and run it. I think that's about all I'm going to do for the moment. I've been looking at the HT leads, and they are looking really rather second hand in places. There's one point where I actually found a hole through the outer sheath, so they're not the best. I'll have to go back to my garage and see if I've got another set, because with an engine like this you want all of the ignition running as nicely as you can. Even a set of nice spark plugs will help. And like I did with all the battery terminals and things, I'm going to clean off all of the wiring connectors for the ignition as well. What I've got here is a glug of engine oil in one of those old, well, it's not old, it's one of those what they called eye wash syringes. So you snap the top off and wash stuff out of your eyes. It's out of my medical kit, and I've just snapped the top off, pulled the eye wash out and filled it with oil. So I'm just going to put a tiny drop of oil down each of the spark plug holes to make sure that the tops of the pistons and the ring gear is all nicely lubricated before I put the spark plugs back in. It's getting dark, but that's what I'll be doing. Then I've got my copper slip or copperies, and I'm just going to put a dab of that on the spark plugs before they go in, getting torqued up to 20 Newton meters. Alright, spark plugs are in, all torqued up nicely. Reassuring click at the end, no nasty stripped threads or anything. I'm now just using blue rag and an aerosol or brake and carb cleaner, or brake and clutch parts cleaner, to clean out any debris in the carbs. I've also cleaned the needle as well in the bottom of the suction chamber and then that can go back in. Out here again, it's a bit duller, but it's not actually raining. I found that the power steering fluid was a bit low, so I've just topped that up with some ATF. I've taken that long breather extension off as well because I just don't think I'm going to need it. I've got my tool with me today for pumping up and trying to get oil pressure using the drill, and before I do that I'm going to slurp some oil straight over the rocker gear into the top of the engine. I'm just using some, what is it, 2050 VR1 Valvoline, but yeah, I'll put a bit over the rocker gear, allow that to flow down onto the camshaft area before I pump it up and then crank it again. Right, got a bit of oil on there. That in there, you can just see the top of the oil pump drive. Ordinarily that would be driven by the bottom of the camshaft, bottom of the distributor via the camshaft. This is the tool that I've made ages ago, just with a bit of square section on the end, which will pick up on the end of that pump. So I shove it in the end of the drill, buzz it over, and all things being well, we'll see oil being pushed out the rockers, and thereby we've got oil pressure in the engine without having to ever really turn it over or risk damaging a bearing or anything like that. Well, things don't always go to plan, as we know. Basically, that is the little hole, the top one there and that one there, where oil should be pushed up to go into the rocker pedestals and then lubricate, and that should be an indication of getting oil pressure. Whereas try as I might with the different drills, I can't get it to spin up enough, so it's just not drawing. So what I think I need to do is have a look at that pump and make sure it's actually capable of pumping. Just as I was about to start stripping the pump apart, I thought I'd have another go with the drill. So I put it back in the meaty drill, high-speed drill, and sure enough, it works. I'm just going to put the camera down while I get this aligned. One moment, please. Right, this will probably be quite messy, but you get the idea. If you watch that hole there you go, see? So we're definitely getting oil pressure. I'm going to put the rocker gear back on again, making sure that all of those push rods are correctly aligned with the hydraulic tappets. You can actually feel when you've got them in because they compress up and down, and actually the feeling of them has changed slightly since I've been pumping, because obviously they've been pressurized slightly as well, I would imagine. Actually no, I'm not sure whether they could have been. I think they pump up. Yeah, no, they must have been pumped up. Anyway, so I'm going to make sure they're all back in, put the rocker gear back on, and tighten it down progressively. I'll have to go look up the tightening torque. I'll let you know and report back in a moment. Right, I put the rocker back on, or the rocker gear. That got torqued down to 38 Newton meters. Then I gave it another whiz over with the drill, and you can see the oil coming out, and I've checked that side too, and you can see oil coming out, so that's all good. So now that's done, I can put the rocker covers back on, put the distributor back in, and the oil priming side of things should be done. Right, the covers are back on, the distributor is ready to go back in. Remember how I made those reference marks on the body of the Dizzy and also the timing cover? So I've got to get the body of the distributor back in that position with the rotor arm pointing at the mark I made on the outside as well. But what complicates that, two things. One is that as you push this on, because of the helical gear, it turns, which I said before. The other thing is you've got to get the slot that the top of the oil pump has aligned with the slot on the underside of there. So you kind of need to pre-turn the pump to where you think it needs to be before you put the distributor in, and then as it goes in, that should turn to the right place. It is a ball ache, and there's no way I'm going to be able to do this like holding the camera, and even if I had a monopod or like some sort of stand, I doubt you'd see much other than me getting frustrated and swearing at things. So I'll have a bash at that and I will report back again. So what I did was I put the distributor in and out a couple of times just to watch how that rotor arm moved when it was engaging with the gear on the cam, and it goes through about maybe 20 degrees. So I was offering the dizzy with the rotor arm up to the oil pump, knowing that that was about 20 degrees off. Then I had a look at what the shaft looked like on the underside of the pump distributor, and then matched it in there with the pump by turning it with that. So then when it dropped in, it all lined up. So now I'm just going to keep turning that and make sure that the body is in the right place and that the distributor still lines up. So more poking around. Right, I've just put a bit of fuel in using a little pumpy thing and the old fuel line from the car. I've got my hose pipe set up and I'm just going to crank it, chokes on. I don't know whether any fuel has actually reached in there yet, but I'm going to just see what happens when I fire it this time. You'll see. It's doing something. Well, it fired. I think what we have here is a lack of fuel more than anything else, so I'll go and get a bit more. Fitted a temporary fuel supply just from the can. It runs up. Bit puffy, misfiring, but yeah. Considering I haven't done the timing clock here or anything, it doesn't have an airbox on it. Pretty happy. So I'm just going to let it warm up a little bit, partly to get that coolant circulating so I can drain it out later. I'm also still curious about the oil pressure, because that light never came off or went on or did anything, and yet I know it's getting oil pressure, so we'll have a bit more of an investigate later. But that's great news, because it means I can set the timing, fiddle about with it, get a set of new HT leads, fit the airbox, and I've also found in my box of spares another fuel pump, so I can reinstate that once I've finished draining that fuel tank. So yeah, really happy.